Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I am your host Deepak. It is a great honor to welcome Dr. Deval Kartik, Senior Case Study Writer at HEC Paris in Doha, as our distinguished guest on today's episode. Dr. Deval is an academic with 2 decades of multicultural teaching experience. Before transitioning to full-time academia, she spent a decade in education and training. Her strength lies in interdisciplinary learning, which she effectively integrates into the diverse courses she teaches. Drawing from methods such as participatory rural appraisal, she applies research techniques to generate consumer insights. Additionally, her consulting experience allows her to incorporate design thinking into the brand communication sphere. She encourages students to think differently and beyond conventional boundaries, enabling them to explore multiple approaches to problem solving. This approach helps her facilitate subjects effortlessly across students from various disciplines and cultural backgrounds. Applied research is her passion, and she enjoys writing case studies published by the Case Center. She is on the Regional Advisory Council of the Case Center for the Middle East region. Dr. Deval earned an MBA in marketing from the Institute of Management Development and Research, Pune, India, and completed a PhD in marketing at Aglia Ruskin University, Cambridge, UK. In this episode, Dr. Deval Kartik will offer valuable insights from her research, mastering the case study method, writing, evaluating, and driving impact. Kicking off this conversation, let's welcome Dr. Deval Kartik to the show. It's a real privilege to welcome you, Dr. Deval. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to connect with you and participate in this podcast. It's a real pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deval. Dr. Deval, what are the core principles behind the case study learning method, and why has it become such a powerful tool in both academia and business?
It's a very interesting question. If you look at the history of case studies, they actually originated with the legal system. So the legal system started having case studies in 1870s. Medical system also started using them, and the business case studies became prominent since 1921. So we're actually celebrating 104 years of case studies being used in business education. So there are several factors which make for core principles of learning through the case method. One thing I prominently feel is that it's a method which is connecting realism and conceptual learning. So it's like a simulation which is presented to the students in the classroom, and the students then have to analyze the situation and come up with their own suggestions, views, and that's a very practical method. So that is one of the first and the key principles of case method of learning. The second principle is that it's a very active method of learning. Unlike a classroom where a professor comes and gives a lecture, which is one-sided, the case method integrates learning much more. It's active, it's participatory, it involves group work, and as a result of this group work, the students tend to understand each other's point of view. They at least listen to other people, and that's the core of working in an organization where teamwork is so much important. This also involves critical thinking and analysis. Many a times we are into literal thinking. We don't go beyond a certain way of thinking, but this method allows lateral thinking, and students can think of several perspectives in solving a case study. It also allows for collaboration with other students. You're also curious about what other groups are doing, how they are working on a problem. Another important part is that it allows for decision making under uncertainties. The students have some idea because of the written or the audiovisual case that they are looking at, but that is not sufficient. There are several other factors that they have to think of. And that is where a well-written case study, along with all the exhibits, help them understand and realize the situation much better. And of course, it integrates theory and practice. So that becomes a very important concept. This is a learner-centered approach. And that is also what contributes to the learning. It also involves empathy and design thinking, which is, empathy is a core principle of design thinking. So all these things come together to help and facilitate the learning process. And that, I believe, are the core factors that make this method so much better than, let's say, a classroom lecture.
Very insightful. Can you walk us through the key elements that make a case study compelling and engaging for learners?
Okay, one of the key things is that I always keep saying that a business case study is the story of a business. And, the true elements of a good story is that it needs to have a case hero or the case protagonist, as we say. It has to have a dilemma, which is intriguing the readers as to what should this person do now. And the third element is that it should have a ticking time line. So if it is something that needs to be done in a time frame, it becomes more interesting than something that's open-ended and you can do it maybe in 100 years. Who cares? So these are the three elements. At the end of it, there is a treasure to be found. So, like a gripping story, if a case study has these four elements, it makes it super interesting. From the learning perspective, it needs to be realistic, it needs to be relevant. Uh, Many a times there's a debate about whether a case study should be recent. Well, it does matter if the topic is something that's immediate, right? So let's say if there was a case study on COVID, it was super relevant in, let's say, 2020 and 2021. However, a case study on COVID is a little less relevant right now. But if we are looking at a scenario as to what if any kind of emergency happens, whether it's in medical field or the world scenario is difficult right now with wars going on everywhere. If we are looking at uncertain situations and how to handle them, that case study can be relevant for maybe multiple years or decades as well. So the relevance and uh, relevance as well as it being realistic are one of the important things. If a case study has a clear central problem, that becomes interesting and that adds to the dilemma. So a clear focus on one point, but giving some other information on the other side issues as well is what makes it for an interesting case study. A case study which is rich, multidimensional, is again brilliant. The case protagonist, I think, is a very, very important person. It could be any gender, but the case protagonist is super important because that person drives the entire case study, drives the entire narrative. So, good information about who this protagonist is, making that protagonist human is what really matters. So, the case protagonist becomes very, very important. Then, if a case study has all the information given in it, it's a little bit tricky because then you are almost guiding the students towards an answer, but allowing students to search for additional information, get into the scenario, get into a pestle or a SWOT analysis would help them understand the situation much better, and that analysis would become much rich. So not giving every information in the case study, but allowing students to explore the scenario on their own is again equally important. Then, of course, concepts that they will learn from the case need also to be clarified, thought through much earlier. And that is why we say that before even we begin writing a case study, the first thing we need to write is the learning objective. So how is it that, what is it that this case will help me teach in the classroom? What learning objectives it will be able to fulfill is very, very important. Many a times case writers have this way of looking for case studies. For example, reading through a business newspaper or generally being interested in situations around you and thinking as to how you can make this into a case study is very interesting because that is when you start thinking in terms of what is it that the students will learn from this. So preparing your learning objective before you even start writing the case study is important. The case study evolves as the case writers start writing it, because the more you look at one situation, you know that there are several other connecting things. So you actually go into the rabbit hole of trying to learn different things, and the entire process becomes enriching not just for the case students who will be learning it, but also for the people, for the case writers. So that is another important part. A narrative structure is important. Now, I like to give this example of, let's say, a Netflix series that, is very, very engaging. The key elements of such an engaging series or a drama should actually come into your case study as well. However, we must realize that many a times we have the limit, because so far even, we have all the case studies that are written format. Most of them are. And therefore, in the written format, going back and forth again and again is not very advisable. Therefore, maintaining a flow of events is important. And that is where the good journals or good publishing houses, such as the Harvard Business School or Ivy Business Publishing, have this view that you should have a case study that's written always in the past tense. It should start at a point and only go backwards and not go forward. So these are some of the elements which will, help writing and reading the case study much better, much easier for the students to read it. The concepts which will help the case writer also write it in a more meaningful way.
Thank you, Dr. Deval. Dr. Deval, what common pitfalls do writers encounter when creating case studies, and how can they be avoided?
Some of the common pitfalls, and I think when you teach the case study you've written in the class for the first time, you realize them very quickly, because the students have questions about not just the topic, but they also say that I don't understand. Why do you write it this way? It's not easy for me to read. Right? So some of the feedback from the student comes in, and many a times one of the major pitfall that needs to be avoided is a lack of focus. So if you have a central dilemma in the case, it is easier. However, if that is lacking, students don't know what exactly are they trying to solve here. What should they look for? So the clear focus, a clear case dilemma is what is required. Having said that, there are, of course, decision case studies and there are situational case studies. The situational case studies also need to be written in a way where the students should understand what they are looking for. For instance, if it's a situational case, you are still, maybe the case title can be so provocative that the students know what exactly are they looking for. I had written a case study along with my colleagues from HEC Paris, which was on Total Energy. And the title clearly was, are they greenwashing? The moment you say this word, the students know what they're going to be looking for. The case was in a narrative structure with two people in a dialogue. But the students were very clear what they were supposed to look for in the case study, because the title suggested that. So either it's that or the first paragraph of the case, which narrates the problem in a very clear, straightforward language and says, what should the protagonist do? The protagonist has this one or two major choices, but what should the protagonist do? And maybe at the end of it, you come back to the protagonist again and you say that, are these the only two choices? Or maybe, could you suggest something more? So a very clear direction is what is required. The other major pitfall could be that maybe there's too much information given or there's too little. So either of that is not the best thing to do. There are, this current times, there is a demand for shorter case studies. Nobody likes to read long case studies, which is completely understandable. However, when the case study is too short, you are expecting students to do a lot more research. And given the fact that each course has at least 3 case studies in a week, there's a lot the students have to read and research. So sometimes a slightly longer case study, maybe 4 to 5 pages or 6 pages, with enough information is what we need, but not too much information, not too little information is what we are looking at. Another thing could be a lack of relevance, which is problematic, because if the students have no idea of what the scenario is about, that could be a problematic. How can that be overcome? One is that if it's a case study based in a specific country, mention the country very clearly. So if the students need to read up something about the country, they can read that. Provide enough references for students to go back to, provides enough exhibits for students to look things up. Put let's say numbers, especially currency related things in common terms. If it's written everywhere in US dollars with millions and billions, it's clear for everyone what these numbers mean. However, if the case study is very old and if you're still talking of numbers, somewhere you need to mention how much that amount comes to in the current scenario for students to not research into simple things, so make things easier for the students also. If the characters in the case study are one-dimensional, that is problematic because we human beings are never one-dimensional. So we have multiple ways of thinking, looking at things. So that is important. If the case study is overtly prescriptive and guides you clearly towards a solution, saying this is the solution of the case, well, that's not interesting because it's like, having a murder mystery where the murder is solved right in the first page itself. Case studies we know are being used now at undergraduate level, postgraduate level, in executive education. In executive education, where the participants are at a super senior level or maybe at the starting level, who is the target audience is what we need to see, and accordingly use the case study for the correct target audience. If you are going to teach very basic concepts, fantastic. Undergraduates need those case studies. However, if you are looking at teaching a case study to a senior level managers, then you need to write it differently, do it differently. Then the structure or the flow of the case study is required so that it's easy to read and it's coherent. And I think the engagement in the case should be such which would then reflect the engagement in the classroom. Without that, it will not come through very, very easily. So these are some of the key pitfalls that need to be avoided.
Very nice. Dr. Deval, how do you balance storytelling and factual rigor when crafting a case study?
While I focused a lot on storytelling, because that is what makes the case study engaging. However, we must realize that it's a case study and it's not a short story or a novel. So one of the key things in a case study is that in the very first paragraph, you need to clearly specify what the company is all about, what the problem is all about, who the person is, he or she is facing this problem, and he or she is at this position in this company. What should the person do to solve this problem? Having said that, the next thing is what you need in a standard case study, the company background, the industry background. Right. If we are not giving all of this, it is really not relevant. So the protagonist also needs to be a strong person in the sense, a multi-dimensional individual. We need to present facts which are verifiable, and that is where referencing, even for a case study, is very, very important, not just for an academic article, but verifiable facts are important. And that is where providing links and references, hyperlinks within the case study, where the students can just on a click go to the information is required. Integrating data into the narration instead of giving, just exhibits where students have to go back and forth. I think integrating data into the narrative itself would also make the case easy to read. So balances the storytelling along with the rigor of a case study. Like a good research paper, a good case study also needs to maintain objectivity. Sometimes what happens is that when we are doing case studies based on field research, we tend to empathize so much with our protagonist. We tend to empathize so much with the situation that we don't realize that there can be other side to the whole story. So making sure that we do not become subjective in our writing, maintaining that objectivity about the situation is very, very important. So that needs to be done. A case study needs to provoke thinking and not push the students for one or the other solution. So to me, I think it's very important that it provokes your thinking, it makes you think about the situation, but not make you think just one way or the other. Accepting somebody else's point of view in a group discussion is also very relevant. So that needs to be done. The writing should be very concise and clear. So I do strongly recommend use of tools like Grammarly and other AI tools, which make you write in a very, very clear, succinct manner. The clearer the writing, the better it is. So that is again an important point. And of course, the end of the case study where you come back to the protagonist and have a clear situation and asking students what should the protagonist do now, or leave it open-ended, asking the students to think in terms of what would you do if you were in this situation is important. So these are some of the key elements that one should keep in mind.
Dr. Deval, what framework or criteria do you recommend for evaluating the effectiveness of a case study?
Okay, so there are, of course, several frameworks that are available. And as I said earlier, I think what's very, very important is that if a case study is written keeping in mind the learning objective, it becomes very, very interesting. Having said that, it also happens that once you start writing the case, you think of several other things. Now, this is interesting because you as a faculty member need to understand whether you want to use this case study for one course or for multiple courses, for one session in a particular course or multiple sessions. So if you're taking an entire, let's say, product and brand management course, and you're going to teach it, but start with one case study, it's perfectly fine because then you can keep referring back to the case study and the students can relate with it. So that becomes a very interesting way of using one case study for multiple things. However, if a case study also has, let's say, marketing, something of finance, something of strategic management, something of operations, it's a little tricky in the sense that you will only need a small part of that case study to teach something of marketing. However, if it's a course on, let's say, principles of marketing, then that case study might become very relevant. So thinking of how you're going to use it becomes very important. And that is where I believe that the teaching note, which we haven't talked about so far, which is a very, very important part of a case study, comes into the picture. Now, a teaching note is something that a faculty or the case writer, in this case both, will write it, but is meant only for other faculty members and not for the students. So this teaching note can become a very valuable tool, and especially when a case study is published. Someone who wants to use it can think of it as a stepping stone as to how do I start this case study, what kind of question should I ask, what should be, how should the student participation be generated during the case study. All of this becomes very important here. When we talk about frameworks, Bloom's taxonomy is the gold standard of creating learning objectives for the case study. So that I would believe is the first recommendation, where the students have to think in terms of whether, you need to analyze something, you need to evaluate something, you need to describe something, what are the application points for the case study. So that becomes very important. Then, of course, there is Kirk-Peters evaluation that is important, where he talks about reaction, learning, behavior, and results. So what are the students going to learn from it? How are the students going to react to a situation? What kind of things are they going to analyze in it? What will be the behavioral outcomes? What will be the situational analysis that they will do? This become another important framework. Then, of course, discussion-based learning is what we are looking at here. So that is, again, a major thing that we have to look at. Is this case study that you would like to give to individual students, where they read by themselves, analyze, and send a report? Or is it a case study that will be discussed in a group? And the group consensus is important over here. Peer learning is important over here. Diverse perspective is what we are looking at. So this is a key. I think for me, it's very important that the case brings in diverse point of view. It helps students listen to others, maybe argue with others, but ultimately be open to another perspective, even if they don't accept it. Understanding that people have different perspective is very, very important. Engagement in the classroom, because that's why we use case method, rather than lecture. So the discussion in the classroom, the time spent, participation, all this is important. I do believe that this point especially is very relevant to a case method. For example, I've written a case study on a company called Taylor and Circus, which is into inclusive innerwear for Indian market. And when I used the case study in the class last year, it generated so much discussion. We went beyond our time. Students didn't want to leave the class, but they wanted to discuss. They wanted to give their point of view. They had, several times they felt excluded, and therefore the importance of inclusiveness was so important to them. So realizing that this is where the whole learning takes place. Maybe just reading the case or my discussing it in the class wasn't sufficient. But their engagement, their questions, their thinking, their perspective mattered so much. So this kind of generating a debate, generating a dialogue, getting engagement, participation is what matters the most. So these are some of the frameworks I would believe the case method uses.
How can educators and trainers measure the real learning impact that a case study delivers?
So I actually completed my MBA in 1990, 35 years back. Why am I talking of that time right now? Is because we had case method for one of our courses, which was for strategic management. And till date, I remember the case studies, some of them, because they changed my thinking, they changed my perspective, they changed my view of how the industry works. What appears to be the fact from the outside versus what is actually happening inside. So for me, I think my love for the case method started at that point of time when I started realizing that there's so much more happening in the world than what the textbooks offer, right? So the textbooks, of course, are valuable. The faculty, they teach you, that's valuable. But applying those concepts to a real situation became very, very meaningful to me. And from that point of view, I think that understanding the situation, not just that situation, but being able to see that each situation is different and each situation requires different kind of thinking is what the case study method gives you. Then the application of the concepts is very, very useful. So again, last year I was teaching a case study to my students, and even this year I did that. Teaching about brand positioning is one thing. They understand, okay, this is brand positioning done. However, if you do a case study where they're actually supposed to pick up this problem that a particular brand is facing and how it should reposition, you bring in the concepts in the class and you teach it, they apply it, and they come up with a brand positioning statement. It's far more valuable than, let's say, just talking about it in the classroom. So that also helps them apply the concepts as well as retain the concepts much more. The other ways of evaluating would be a pre and past evaluation, where you find out, what did they know earlier and what do they know now. That's important. To me, what's important is, are they open to discussing certain issues? So whether it's a business or a society, being open to discuss issues, being open to generate ideas, critical thinking is very, very important. Case studies can bring in, concepts of, say, sustainability, diversity, inclusion, right? Now, these are the concepts that when you go into the real life, in the real work scenario, you will face it. However, if you have no idea about what these issues are and how they need to be dealt with, one could end up giving, a notion that you are not well prepared for a diverse world. So how they react to these issues and how they open up to this is also a way of understanding whether, they have been able to, they are open to certain kind of learning or not.
Could you share examples of how case studies have driven tangible change or innovation in a business or organizational context?
So just one second. So going back to a point I made earlier was about at which level the case studies are being used is how it matters. So let's say, for example, if it's at undergraduate or a postgraduate level. And the students start thinking in terms of, this is what happened in a company, how can I do it differently? So one of the example I would give here is, let's say two companies, which have a different model of a platform business, and they are doing different things. For example, if you look at a company like Groupon, which connects the buyers and the sellers, and when you analyze it, you realize that on a platform like Groupon, or in Qatar it's called Q Groups, what happens is that the buyers are benefiting uh, as customers benefit. However, the businesses don't benefit much, right? So when you talk to the students about a platform business, which is very relevant these days, they realize that, okay, there's one model of platform business. Then you talk to them about, let's say, another business like the entertainer, which is also a platform business. What happens over there? What kind of investments go in? How the businesses benefits? How the customers benefit? That's one thing. However, if you talk to them about another case study that I've written, which is called the Ram Stretchers, there is a Facebook group which also connects Facebook users in UAE to the merchants in the UAE. But this entire Facebook group is on the simple principles of helping each other, being kind to each other. And it's a social business, and it was never meant to be a money-making business. However, over a period of time, the founders of this Facebook group, the admins of the Facebook group, could monetize it. So for the students to understand that how these different businesses work and how they can, if they want to start something like this without much of an investment, a Facebook group can be much more meaningful, right? So if as a student you want to learn how a platform business works and how you can start a platform business without investing any money of your own, this is fantastic. Can they do this? Yes, definitely. On campuses, they can have a platform business, right? Maybe through a WhatsApp group, through a Facebook group, something like this. So for me, it's a very simple example, I understand. But the idea is to ignite this thinking in the minds of the students. Help them think that, there are several ways of doing a thing, not just one way. The moment you say a platform business, the moment you talk about getting the buyers and the sellers together, you think in terms of how much do I have to invest? Do I need to be very tech savvy? Can I do it on a small scale, or does it have to be on a large scale for it to be monetizing, etc.? But the moment you have a case study like this, which may seem very simple on one level, but also gives them an idea that if you devote your mind to something, it is possible to innovate. It's possible to think through different hurdles and do something. Now, on the other hand, if you are doing a similar case study with, let's say, working professionals, young working professionals, then the example like a company in Qatar called Urban Point comes into mind, where Urban Point actually tied up with the cellular phone provider in Qatar, and the subscribers could get free access to Urban Point, and it is again a platform business, but with access to all the information on the customers, including their mobile phone. So sending them push notifications, marketing messages becomes much more easier. So one can think in terms of which case study to use at which level, and that will help your students actually think in terms of innovation, business ideas, doing something differently, doing something new, innovate something, not just in tech field, but also in social field, is what we are looking at.
Yeah. Dr. Deval, in what ways can digital tools and multimedia enhance the traditional case study format? And what is your opinion about AI-based case study process?
This is a fantastic question. And, in a world that we live in now, it's absolutely impossible to think about a case study without any of this. So somewhere we have seen that audiovisual case studies have become very, very popular, very rightly so. And talking about AI tool, even a written case study can now be converted into a podcast. So recently, a colleague of mine from HEC Paris, she converted a case study we had written into a podcast using AI. With a very simple view that my students are busy, maybe while they're exercising, while they're doing some other chores, while they're walking, whatever they are doing, can they listen to the case study if they don't have time to read it? So that's again a very fantastic tool that is available through AI. Summarizing your case study for students using AI, great possibility. Using a case study which can be interactive through your mobile phone, again a possibility. So sometimes I think, and I would want to try it out in future, I haven't done it so far, would be to have WhatsApp group with the students and send them messages which are the dilemmas, and ask them for simultaneous views on how they should solve this. So maybe an interactive way of doing a case study through using a mobile phone would be very interesting. um, the shorts on YouTube or the reels on Instagram are again very interesting, and some companies are actually working. Coco TV is now working on making this kind of videos. So how can we use that to create a case study? That would be another thing. Integrating certain elements within your audiovisual case studies would be very interesting. I have seen an IMD case study on IKEA, which is done that way, whereby you have to click certain items on the IKEA, when you're talking about IKEA, and then it will take you to the next thing. So more like using a Prezi, but in an interactive format. Using hyperlinks, inserting videos in your case studies. I mean, those are now, I would almost feel getting outdated, but there's so many other fascinating tools that can make a case study much more enriching for the newer generation.
How should case studies be tailored differently depending on whether they are used in academic setting versus corporate training?
Okay, so I first of all believe that a clear target audience is what is required. However, I do believe that if a case study is written, let's say, for a postgraduate group, and it can be used in, let's say, professionals training program, a corporate training program, that is also a possibility. And if the scenario is very different, then the groups can think of it differently. Let me give you an example here. So my colleagues have been using a particular case study, which is about car racing. And he started realizing that, by now everyone knows a lot about cars, and therefore this is not working. What do we do about it? So we thought through this, and we realized that maybe everyone knows cars and car racing. Do people know camel racing? Not so much. We did a lot of research into camels and camel racing. We spoke to people who own camels and race camels, and being in Middle East, that's a possibility. We spoke to camel doctors, veterinary doctors who specialize in camels. We learned so much more about camel racing and created a scenario which in a way mirrored the car racing, but talked very differently about camel racing, what can happen to a camel, what are the stakes involved and all that. And this case study works brilliantly with postgraduate students as well as working professionals. So some of it can be, a completely novel situation that they're not familiar with. If that can come together, it can work very well across the groups that you're working with.
Dr. Deval, my last question. What advice would you give to someone looking to start writing their first case study with the goal of creating meaningful real-world impact?
Well, I would say, first of all, start with a topic that you feel passionate about. If the topic interests you as a faculty member, then your involvement in the topic goes much deeper. So choosing a topic that interests you would be the first thing. Uh, Look up for, just keep looking at business magazines, newspapers. What's the maybe more relevant thing that's happening? How can they look into this? What would be the teaching outcome from this? Is something one needs to look at. Um, don't hesitate to bring in cultural nuances into a case study. That's very important. So if you're case protagonist, it's, let's say, from India, then a little bit of Indianness about that person, which we all have, can come in. It's perfectly fine. So those kind of things are very essential. If you are creating a fictitious uh, case protagonist, then the name of that person, where does this person come from? A little bit of a background would make that person alive. right? So all these are the important things. How will it drive innovation? I think your passion for the topic, where you are thinking in terms of, I know this is what I want to do with this case study. This is the topic I want to teach, and I want my students to apply it in this way. That clarity is something that will help immensely in writing your first case study. Other thing is that always remember that it's a draft. The first one is a draft. Get it out. Don't keep polishing it, because when it is going to be reviewed, they will polish it for you. They will maybe even reject your first draft. No, no worries. That should not stop you from writing a case study. But if you don't get your first draft out in a way to, polish it and making it perfect, that's a problem. So get your first draft out and, talk to colleagues, talk to peers, ask them to read it, give it to your students, ask them to read it and say, how does it read? Get feedback from everyone, be open to this, participate in case conferences. You get really authentic, helpful feedback. So these are some of the ways one can reach out.
Very nice. Thank you. Dr. Deval, our audience would like to know about more traditional approach, what HEC Paris Doha campus is doing in terms of generating case studies and research aspects. If you could share a little bit about.
Sure. So, HEC Paris, the original business school, is over 100-year-old business school in Paris, very well reputed in Europe, and we are the prominent ones in professional education. So, custom programs and EMBA is what we do in Doha. We also do these programs in Saudi Arabia, as well as some programs in the UAE. How do we look at research and case studies? So we write case studies. So as a case writer, I write case studies with my colleagues, and the idea is, of course, to write a case study and teach it. I also write case studies independently for my own teaching that I do at IMT Dubai. So these are some of the things we do. Custom program case studies are important because we look at the company for which we are doing the custom program and look into that specific situation, whether it's leadership, whether it's strategy, whether it's digital transformation. We look at which topic is being taught and for which we need a case study, or even diversity and inclusion. And looking at that company's scenario, speaking to that company's employees, we create that specific case studies. It is relevant for them. It is very specific to them. And therefore, it becomes very, very crucial to use that case study in that particular program. The other case study we write are for our MBA students, our EMBA students. Sometimes we even use it for some of the custom programs. And of course, the idea is to then widely distribute it to the Harvard Business Publishing as well as the Case Center. So this is the way we go about writing a case study. Our case studies involve a lot of research, a lot of inputs that come in from the company that is contributing to the case study, as well as from the vast experience that our faculty members come with. So there's a combination of all these elements that help us make these case studies.
Very insightful. Listeners, as we conclude today's episode, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Deval Kartik for sharing her invaluable insights on mastering the case study method. Her rich experience bridging academia, research, and practical consulting has truly illuminated how interdisciplinary approaches can deepen our understanding and impact. Dr. Deval's passion for applied research and dedication to nurturing innovative thinking among students is inspiring. We are grateful for the opportunity to learn from her expertise in case writing, evolution, and driving meaningful change through education. Thank you, Dr. Deval, for joining us today and generously sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great pleasure, and I hope the participants have learning, and if they have any feedback, I'll be very happy to get that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.